We know Vikings as raiders and warriors. What we don't talk about is what happened after the battle ended. When the axes fell silent and the shield walls broke, the real horror began. Not for the dead warriors, their suffering was over. For their wives, for their daughters. For every woman left breathing in a conquered settlement, what Vikings did to them makes death look like mercy. You think you know Viking brutality? The sagas barely whisper what came next. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from Ibn Fadlan's accounts and archaeological evidence from Dublin slave markets. Now back to the story. 845. The monastery at Clonmacnoise falls to Tregesius and his fleet. 43 monks die defending the altar. The chronicler writes about the slaughter. He stops writing about what happens to the women, but we know, we have the chains. Archaeological digs at Dublin's Wood Quay reveal the infrastructure of Viking slave markets. Iron shackles sized for women's wrists, children's ankle rings, warehouse foundations that held human cargo. The Dublin Vikings didn't just raid for silver and gold, they raided for flesh. A captured wife had value, not as a person, as inventory. The going rate in Hedeby markets: 20 silver pieces for a young woman, 15 for a mother, 10 if she was injured in the taking. These prices appear on runic inscriptions found in Schleswig, actual receipts carved in stone. But here's what the sagas won't tell you. Being sold was the lucky outcome. 862. Vikings sack the settlement at Portmarnock. The Irish annals record 47 warriors killed. They record nothing about the 53 women found in the longhouses. But soil samples from nearby bog sites tell a different story. 23 bodies, all female, all showing signs of systematic violence before death. The violence wasn't random. It followed patterns: skull fractures from behind, defensive wounds on forearms, broken ribs from prolonged assault. These weren't battlefield deaths. These were executions. Slow ones. Carbon dating places the deaths within days of the raid. The women didn't die fighting. They died after surrender, after capture, after the Vikings had time to decide their fate. The decision was always the same. 871. The great heathen army captures Reading. Anglo-Saxon chroniclers record King Ethelred's defeat. They don't record what happened to the royal women, but excavations at the old Saxon palace site tell the story. Foundation stones stained with iron oxide, blood iron. Enough for dozens of people. Viking war culture had rules, strict ones. A defeated warrior's wife became property of his killer, not as a servant, as a wife. Forced marriage by conquest. The Old Norse term is eigenkona, own woman. Property that breathes. 9th century law codes from Iceland spell out the process. The captor declares ownership before witnesses. The woman has no voice in this, no choice, no escape. The marriage is legal. The children born from it are legitimate. The rape is sanctioned by law. The Gragos law codes are specific about time frames. The claiming must happen within 3 days of capture. After that, other warriors can challenge ownership. This led to fights over women, like livestock at market. But forced marriage wasn't the worst fate. 878. Norsemen attacked the monastery at Bangor. The Annals of Ulster record the complete destruction. What they don't record is the ritual that followed. Archaeological evidence from similar sites reveals burn layers filled with bones, female bones, arranged in specific patterns. Viking funeral customs demanded sacrifice. When a great warrior died, his possessions burned with him, his horses, his weapons, his women. Ibn Fadlan witnessed this on the Volga in 921. He describes the ritual rape and murder of a slave girl on her master's funeral pyre. One witness, one account. But archaeology confirms it happened everywhere. Bone analysis from Scandinavian boat burials shows the pattern. Female skeletons found in warrior graves show trauma consistent with strangulation. Drug residues in teeth suggest they were poisoned first. Made compliant. The killing was methodical. The drugs came from specific plants. Henbane seeds found in burial contexts. Enough alkaloids to cause hallucinations and compliance. The women went to their deaths, seeing visions. Perhaps that was mercy, perhaps that was worse. 907. The Great Army winters at Thetford. English chronicles record the usual: cattle stolen, churches burned. They don't record what happened in the camp followers' quarters. But we have the middens. The trash heaps tell us everything. Infant bones, dozens of them. All showing signs of deliberate killing. These weren't stillbirths. These were murders. The children of forced unions between Viking raiders and captive women. Unwanted evidence of systematic rape. The killing methods were efficient. Blunt force trauma to the skull. Quick. Clean. The bones show practice. This wasn't emotional violence. This was procedure. Viking law was clear about mixed blood children. If the mother was a slave, the child was a slave. If the mother was property, the child was property. If the child couldn't work, the child died. Simple economics. The Domesday Book records this practice continuing into Norman times. Entire villages in Yorkshire show population gaps where women should be. The gaps match exactly with known Viking settlement patterns. Correlation is not causation, unless you dig up the bones. Mass graves near Repton tell the story. The Viking Great Army's winter camp of 873 to 874, 249 skeletons in carefully arranged burial chambers. Only 63 are female. The ratio is wrong. Women don't just disappear, unless they're shipped elsewhere. Isotope analysis of the female bones reveals the truth. These women weren't locals. They came from Ireland, Scotland, Wales, captured territory, brought back as cargo. The ones in the graves were the lucky ones. They died of disease or childbirth. Natural causes. The unlucky ones vanished into the slave networks. Viking Age. Dublin wasn't just a trading post, it was a processing center for human trafficking. Ships arrived weekly with fresh captives. The women were sorted by age and condition. The young ones went to Norse settlements as breeding stock. The older ones went to Islamic markets via the Russian river routes. Dendrochronology of Dublin's wharf posts shows continuous rebuilding from 841 to 970. 60 years of expansion. The slave trade was booming. Each new wharf meant more capacity, more human cargo. The warehouses held up to 200 people at a time. Stone foundations showed drainage channels, not for rainwater, for human waste. These weren't temporary holding areas, they were long-term storage. 9th century Arabic sources describe Viking slave caravans reaching Baghdad. The women brought premium prices in eastern markets. Fair-skinned Germanic and Celtic women were exotic luxuries. The Vikings knew their market. They supplied it efficiently. If you value documented Viking and Norse-era history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, comment from which city you're hearing this from. Now, back to the story. The eastern route ran through Novgorod and Kiev, a 1,000-mile journey down the Dnieper River. Ship manifests carved in runes list human cargo alongside furs and amber. 20 women per vessel, standard load. But the worst fate wasn't slavery, it wasn't forced marriage, it wasn't ritual sacrifice. It was what happened to the women who fought back. 914. Irish forces retake Dublin from the Norse. The Annals of the Four Masters describe the liberation. They don't describe what they found in the execution grounds outside the city walls. Recent excavations at the site reveal punishment pits, stone-lined holes designed for prolonged dying. The skeletons inside show specific trauma patterns. Broken legs to prevent escape, broken arms to prevent self-harm. These women were kept alive while they died. The pits measured exactly 6 feet deep by 3 feet wide. Too narrow to lie down, too shallow to stand. The victims died in a crouch, over days, sometimes weeks. Viking law codes describe the punishment for a slave who kills or injures her master. Burial alive, but not quick burial. The pit was shallow enough for air, deep enough to prevent escape. The victim died of thirst or exposure. Sometimes it took weeks. Archaeological evidence confirms this wasn't theoretical. Soil analysis from the Dublin pits shows extended decomposition periods. These women died slowly, by design. The punishment had variations. Some pits contained sharp stones, others held standing water. The goal wasn't just death, it was suffering, public suffering. Other captives watched. They learned. 919, Norwegian King Harald Fairhair consolidates power. The Civil Wars end, Viking expansion slows, but the slave networks remain. Peace didn't stop the trafficking, it industrialized it. Established trade routes meant regular schedules, predictable supply. Viking merchants could guarantee delivery dates for human cargo. This appears in Byzantine trade agreements, standard commercial terms, for people. The Rus-Byzantine Treaty of 944 lists slave prices by category. Young women commanded premium rates. Pregnant women sold at discount. Children under 10 were nearly worthless. The market was sophisticated. 937. The last major Viking raid on Irish territory ends at the Battle of Brunanburh. 5 kingdoms unite to crush the Norse invasion. They win decisively. What they find in the Viking baggage trains changes how we understand medieval warfare. Portable breeding pens. Iron frameworks designed to hold human cargo during transport. Chain assemblies sized for children. Mobile slave markets that moved with the army. War wasn't just about territory. It was about harvesting people. The pens were modular. They assembled into larger compounds for long-term captivity. Disassembled for rapid movement. The engineering was elegant, efficient, horrifying. Each pen held 12 adults or 20 children. Iron rings embedded in wooden frames created anchor points for chains. The wear patterns show constant use. This wasn't occasional brutality, this was systematic industry. The women of defeated warriors weren't casualties of war. They were the objective. living resources to be collected, processed, and distributed. The Viking economy ran on forced labor. Female forced labor specifically. Archaeological surveys of known Viking settlements show consistent patterns. Every major town had holding facilities. Every port had processing centers. The infrastructure was everywhere, hidden in plain sight. 954. Eric Bloodaxe dies at Stainmore. The last Viking kingdom in England falls, but the slave networks persist. Christian kingdoms inherit the infrastructure. They don't dismantle it, they rebrand it. Medieval monastery records show indentured servants appearing in large numbers after Viking defeats. These weren't voluntary contracts. These were rebranded slaves, women captured by Vikings, now serving Christian masters. The terminology changed. The reality didn't. 966. Harold Hardrada dies at Stamford Bridge. The Viking Age ends in England. But excavations from this period tell a darker story. Mass graves filled with women show execution dates matching Viking defeats. When Viking power collapsed, the evidence had to disappear. The witnesses had to die. But here's the detail that changes everything. Recent excavations at Repton have uncovered something new. A mass grave sealed in 986 contains the remains of 236 individuals, all female, all showing signs of systematic execution. But isotope analysis reveals they weren't captives. They were Norse women. The grave dates to the period when Viking power in England was collapsing. English forces were pushing back, Norse settlements were falling. These women weren't prisoners of war. They were Vikings, own wives and daughters, killed to prevent their capture. The execution methods match those used on captives: blunt force trauma, strangulation, poisoning. The Vikings applied their own techniques to their own families. They knew what awaited captured women. Soil cores from the burial site show the killing happened over several days. This wasn't panic, this was planned elimination. Fathers killing daughters, husbands killing wives, to save them from what they had done to others. The chronicles never mention this. The sagas are silent. But the bones don't lie. When Vikings faced defeat, they killed their own women rather than let them face what they had inflicted on others. They knew exactly what awaited captured wives. The Repton grave contained one final detail: a single runic inscription carved into a skull. 3 words in Old Norse: better this way. Someone took time during mass execution to carve a justification. Even in murder, they needed to be right. The skull belonged to a girl aged 12 to 14. Isotope analysis shows she was born in Norway, brought to England as a child, killed by her own people to prevent her capture. The inscription was carved after death. Someone wanted her to understand, but the systematic nature of Viking sexual violence went beyond individual raids. It was embedded in their legal system. The Gragas codes from Iceland detail specific procedures for claiming women. The captor had to announce his claim publicly, 3 witnesses minimum. The woman's resistance was irrelevant under law. If she killed herself to escape, the captor could claim compensation from her family. Suicide was theft of property. The going rate was 40 silver marks, more than most men earned in a year, 978. Ethelred becomes King of England. His first royal decree addresses Viking slave trading, not to stop it, to tax it. Royal customs records from London show systematic collection of duties on human cargo, 5 silver pieces per woman, 2 per child. The English weren't horrified by Viking practices. They were jealous of Viking profits. Maritime archaeology reveals the scope of this trade. Shipwrecks along the North Sea routes contain specialized cargo holds, ventilation systems for human transport, water storage for weeks at sea. These weren't improvised slave ships. They were purpose-built. The largest discovered vessel could transport 80 people in its hold. Timber analysis dates it to 912. Carbon scoring shows it burned at sea, all cargo lost. 80 women died in chains below deck. But some women found ways to fight back that the chronicles ignore. 923. A woman named Gunhild appears in Frankish records, described as a freed Norse captive who led raids against Viking settlements. She knew their tactics, their weaknesses, their fears. Gunhild's war lasted 7 years. Frankish sources credit her with destroying 12 Viking camps and freeing over 300 captives. She used Viking methods against them: surprise attacks, no prisoners, no mercy. Her final raid targeted the slave market at Rouen. Contemporary accounts describe systematic execution of every Viking trader found in the city. 47 men killed. The method was always the same: castration first, then bleeding out. Gunhild vanishes from records after 930. But excavations at former Viking sites along the Seine show burn layers from this period. Someone was hunting Vikings, someone who knew exactly how to hurt them. The practice of claiming defeated women spread beyond Scandinavia. Norman sources from the 11th century describe similar customs in conquered England. William's knights received land grants that included all chattels found thereon. Chattels included women. The Domesday Book records this systematically. Manor entries list livestock, grain stores, and female dependents in the same categories. Property assessments treated women as agricultural equipment, valuable but replaceable. Archaeological evidence from Norman castles reveals the infrastructure this required. Castle courtyards contained holding cells built specifically for women. Stone walls, iron doors, no windows. Some held 30 people at a time. Bone analysis from castle middens shows infant mortality rates near 100%. The children of forced unions didn't survive long. This wasn't neglect, this was policy. Mixed blood children were evidence of rape. Evidence created liability. 1066. Harold Godwinson dies at Hastings. England falls to the Normans. But the Norman conquest followed Viking patterns exactly. Systematic capture of Saxon women. Forced marriages to Norman knights. Legal frameworks that made rape into marriage. Contemporary chroniclers described it as Hon civilizing the Saxon bloodline. Modern terminology would call it ethnic cleansing through sexual violence. The methodology was identical to Viking practice. The justification was different. Medieval marriage contracts from this period revealed the economics. Saxon heiresses commanded premium prices from Norman suitors, not for love, for land rights. Rape became a property transfer mechanism. The woman's consent was legally irrelevant. Church records show resistance. Saxon women choosing death over marriage. Convent populations increased by 300% in the decade after Hastings. Suicide rates spiked among noble women. The church classified these as martyrdoms. The state classified them as property destruction. But the most chilling evidence comes from genetic analysis of modern populations. Isotope studies of medieval graveyards reveal population mixing patterns that match historical rape campaigns. Celtic and Saxon mitochondrial DNA shows up in Scandinavian populations from the 9th century onward. The genetic trail follows the slave routes exactly. This wasn't cultural exchange. This wasn't voluntary migration. This was industrial-scale breeding programs using captured women. The DNA evidence proves systematic sexual violence across 3 centuries. Modern Icelandic populations carry 60% Celtic female lineage. Norwegian populations show 40% British Isles female ancestry. These numbers represent thousands of captured women, thousands of forced pregnancies, thousands of children who never knew their mothers' real names. The scale was enormous. The methodology was precise. The records were deliberately destroyed. But some evidence survived destruction. Recent excavations at Jorvik have uncovered a previously unknown building. Radiocarbon dating places construction at 876. The structure contained 64 individual cells. Each cell held chains anchored to stone walls. This wasn't a prison, this was a breeding facility. Soil analysis reveals continuous occupation for 40 years. Bone fragments suggest hundreds of individuals passed through these cells. All female, all showing signs of repeated pregnancy, all disposed of when no longer productive. The building sat in York's city center. Everyone knew what happened there. The local church maintained detailed baptismal records of children born in the facility. 732 births. Only 12 children survived past age 5. The church records list these children as foundlings of unknown parentage. They were sold as servants to wealthy families. The profits funded church construction, God's work financed by systematic rape. Medieval account books from York Minster show regular payments to facility operators, not bribes, not charity, contract payments for sanctuary services. The church wasn't just complicit, the church was a business partner. This pattern repeated across Viking-controlled territories. Every major settlement had similar facilities. Every church maintained similar records. Every authority collected similar profits. The infrastructure was comprehensive. The profits were enormous. The suffering was unimaginable. But the most devastating revelation comes from recent soil core analysis at Repton. The mass grave of Norse women contained more than execution victims. Deeper layers reveal multiple burial episodes spanning 50 years. This wasn't one massacre. This was ongoing elimination. Generation after generation of Viking women killed to hide the evidence. Chemical analysis of bone fragments shows deliberate poisoning with mercury compounds. Not quick-acting poisons, slow toxins that caused madness before death. The women died insane, unable to speak coherently about what they had witnessed. Even Viking women who survived the violence couldn't testify against it. The poisoning destroyed their credibility along with their lives. Testimony from mad women carried no legal weight, the perfect silencing method. The Repton site continues yielding evidence. Recent excavations have uncovered children's remains mixed with adult women, mother-child execution pairs, families eliminated together to prevent any survivors carrying stories forward. isotope analysis reveals these weren't just random killings. The victims were systematically selected based on their knowledge. Women who had served as interpreters, women who had managed slave facilities, women who knew too much to live. Even in death, Viking women had no voice, no choice, no escape. The Repton grave contained one final detail: a single runic inscription carved into a skull. 3 words in Old Norse. Better this way. Someone took time during mass execution to carve a justification. Even in murder, they needed to be right. They knew exactly what awaited captured wives.